Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CTE Model Curriculum Standards webinar. We are happy that you're with us this morning. Thank you for adding your names and some morning greetings in the chat box. We are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for your patience. As we do, though, if you would take a moment to just reflect on the question that's on the screen here about your own practice in regards to the CTE Model Curriculum Standards. So, we're not going to be sharing your responses, but just think to yourself how you feel your understanding is of your pathway's Model Curriculum Standards. Today's webinar is meant to be a refresh on the Model Curriculum Standards. Obviously, these are familiar to you already, but we just wanted to share again the overall information around how we can integrate standards into our curriculum and just overview the format and the way in which the standards were designed and how you might be able to use them in your programs. Good morning again to you all. My name is Lori Morton. I'm the Career Pathway Engagement Manager for the Tulare County Office of Education. I'm part of the TCOE College and Career team, and we've been doing a series of webinars for our instructors out there who have been working so diligently to transition to a distance learning format under our current conditions. And so thank you for all that you continue to do. Even though the school year is wrapping up, we know that you all are already starting to plan for the fall. And even though we don't know yet what that might look like, there's always, some planning time that goes into the summer. And those of you that might be even starting new programs or continuing to enhance and develop your existing pathway programs, we're glad that you're here. The Tulare County Office of Education is also the convener of the Regional Tulare Kings College and Career Collaborative. And some of you have attended our workshops before, and we're glad that you're back. We also serve as coaches for college and career for a variety of districts in the Tulare and Kings County region. And so we have done Model Curriculum Standards trainings for the last several years, and we also do these with individual districts who need additional training. So we're happy to see some familiar names and faces of the districts that we get to work with. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move forward. So again, just reflecting on your own practice and your understanding of the pathway standards, we'll jump right in to the webinar this morning. A couple quick Zoom webinar protocols. We're going to ask that you keep your microphone on mute. There will be some opportunities to ask questions. And if you would like to raise your virtual hand, you can do so by using the participants button at the bottom of your screen. I'll do my best to monitor the chat box and the participant box to make sure that if someone has a question, we can integrate that in. And then of course, there'll be some time for questions at the end of the webinar as well. We are recording this session, and we will be posting this on our website at tkccc.org. You'll also get directly an email if you registered for the webinar today with a link to the slides. So you'll have the slides that you'll be able to click on to follow some of the websites that are included in the PowerPoint today. Okay, so again, today's webinar is really designed to be a refresher. It's just a 1-hour webinar to go over, again, the kind of structure and framework of the CTE standards and how you might be able to integrate them into your existing and ongoing curriculum. So you can find the CTE Model Curriculum Standards on the California Department of Education's website. The link is located here. I'm also going to put this link for you in the chat box. Let me grab that, and I will put it in the chat in case you haven't had a chance to find your CTE standards. We are going to be giving some time to have those pulled up in front of you. So that's the link to the CTE standards. And then I'm also going to put this link in the chat box right now as well. This is to the standards for career ready practice, which is what we're really going to be looking at first this morning. So there are the two links there in the chat box that you can click to to view the standards we're going to be talking about today. This document on this slide that you're looking at here is what they call the executive summary, and if you follow the link to the CTE website, there is an executive summary of the overall CTE Model Curriculum standards, and the sectors and pathways that are included, the development of the standards, and so on. And then each industry sector has their own standards, as you know. So the target outcomes for today is really refreshing your knowledge about the model curriculum standards, and again, how they're organized. Examine existing and additional resources for planning and incorporating the model curriculum standards into your CTE pathway courses. We realize that with the transition to distance learning, it's not as easy sometimes in a career technical education to still be addressing some of the standards in a distance learning format. And so we want to think about how we can be innovative and think outside the box while still, teaching the standards to our students. And then, of course, we want to ensure that you have the knowledge and skills that you need to continue to update your course outlines. Some of you may have the standards integrated into your existing course outlines. And then, of course, how do the standards sequence into the multiple courses that exist within your pathway? So we'll be talking about that briefly as well. Okay, so some of you may know the CTE Model Curriculum Standards originally came out in 2006, and then were upgraded in 2013 for educational consistency and alignment to industry. What that means is that they realized that a lot had changed between 2006 and 2013, and so several things needed to be updated. Another important part was that they wanted to integrate other sectors into the development of the standards. So they included post-secondary systems as well as industry partners into that process. What they did was they ended up converting what they had originally called the industry sector foundation standards into what we now call the industry sector anchor standards, in alignment with the California Common Core state standards anchors. And then the pathway standards were still considered the pathway standards. But the other two components they added were the standards for career ready practice, which we're going to be digging into first. And then they also added something that hadn't been done before, which was an academic alignment matrix that was aligned with the state standards, the Common Core state standards. So just as a way to allow both CTE and academic instructors to see how they could align and integrate their curriculum so that they are reinforcing both academics and career technical education skills in their programs. So the standards are really, as I said, an integration of industry, academics, and our pathway. And so it was a process with hundreds of individuals involved in developing the standards over time. And what we have right now is that second updated version of our CTE standards. So when they did this, they wanted to make sure that there was research and evidence that supported these standards, and that they addressed certain industries, that they were rigorous and they were clear and specific. And then again, as I mentioned, that they were aligned with post-secondary and work expectations. So if a student leaves your high school CTE pathway, they will be able to transition either into a post-secondary college program or the workforce with the knowledge and skills that they need to be successful. They also set up the standards in such a way that they could be measurable and utilized for performance measurement. And we'll talk about that a little bit today as well. So this is the pyramid that we're going to be referencing throughout our webinar today. And so the broadest base of the CTE Standards Continuum pyramid is the standards for career ready practice. These are standards in which all students should be taught throughout their educational career. Things like how to communicate effectively, utilizing technology to enhance productivity, demonstrating creativity and innovation. And really, as we mentioned, these are for all students. Whether or not they are registered in a CTE pathway, they should be learning about personal health and safety, how to utilize critical thinking and understand the environmental, social, and economic impacts of their decisions. We hope that all students have these standards for career-ready practice under their belt by the time they leave us after senior year. And so this was the baseline for all students as they move forward in education. The link that I put in the chat box that says Standards for Career-Ready Practice is a link to this poster here that you're seeing on your screen. This was designed for the updated version of the CTE Model Curriculum Standards. And it takes those standards for career-ready practice and puts them into a format with some additional information. Every industry sector CTE standards document has these standards for career-ready practice integrated into it. So you'll notice when we get to your industry sector that these standards for career-ready practice are already included in that document. What is one of the career-ready standards that you thread throughout your course because you believe it's critical for readiness? So I'm going to go to the previous slide here, and if you could just really quick, take a look at these 12 standards for career-ready practice and put one or two of them in the chat box by number that you feel that you are integrating into your program because you feel it's essential. And you're probably using many of these and all of these on a regular basis. Just type into the chat box there which of these standards you find. Because it's critical for readiness. I wanted to make sure I had the right terminology there. Thanks, Dawn. Martin, great. Thank you. All right, thanks, Rich. So I'm seeing a couple of 5s, critical thinking, of course. Valid and reliable research strategies. We have technology, of course. Obviously, we've needed technology here in the most recent months, haven't we? Personal health, financial literacy, ethical leadership, and effective management. That's a great one. Okay. Thank you for participating and thinking about how you thread these throughout your courses. One other item we wanted to share with you here is the alignment of these career-ready practices throughout other academic subjects. And it looks like this slide is a little bit visually, looks a little bit pixelated. So we can include this in the email that we send to you. But basically, each group of standards has these sort of overarching standards that are needed for all students. And so what we did was develop this crosswalk, basically, of each of these sets of standards so that you could see how they overlap and how they are connected, no matter the subject area. And you'll see some commonalities too. Problem solving is in there across the board. Applying, interdisciplinary, alignment and evidence-based research, things like that. So we have, English language arts, mathematics, science and engineering, history, social studies, arts, and of course computer science as they align with the CTE Career Ready standards. So we thought that was an important document to share. Okay. All right, so what we'd like you to do at this point in time is follow that first link that you saw in the chat box to the CTE Model Curriculum Standards website. And if you don't already have it downloaded on your computer, take a moment to find the industry sector that is relevant to the programs in which you teach. There might be more than one that you are working in, but let's just pick one as a primary industry sector so that we can focus on that throughout the remainder of the webinar, and you can be referencing it as we move through the content here today. What I have up on the screen is the basic contents. This one is pulled from the health science and medical technology industry sector. And so we've already talked about the California Standards for Career Ready Practice. That was included in the document, along with the knowledge and performance anchor standards relative to that sector, the pathway standards, and then the academic alignment matrix. And so these are the main contents that we'll be reviewing with you today and touching on as we move forward. So if you haven't yet, please pull up your industry sector standards so that you have them as reference. And if you need to, you can minimize your share screen so that you can be looking at both the presentation and your sector document at the same time. Okay, so hopefully you have your document there in front of you, and what you'll find is that we're going to be looking first at those industry sector anchors, otherwise known as knowledge and performance anchor standards. So in your industry sector, and of course this may look different depending on which industry sector you have selected. This visual here is out of the building and construction trades industry sector. But you'll notice that these standards, the knowledge and performance anchor standards, are listed here for this particular industry sector. What I'd like for you to do, we're going to take just 2 minutes of library time. And once you have found your knowledge and performance anchors, just take a moment to review them and see what you notice. Okay, so now that you've had a moment to look at your knowledge and performance anchor standards for your industry sector, what are some things that you might have noticed as you were looking at those standards? Well, you might have noticed that these are standards that all CTE students should be able to know, right? And the way that they're formatted is that the standard is the bold text across the top, and then the performance indicators are the subtext. So if I go back to this visual here, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 are the big buckets of the standard with these indicators underneath, like 2.1, 2.2, and so on, to break down what exactly that looks like in that industry sector. So as communication would be across the board in every sector, what those communication standards might look like might be a little bit different. Okay, again, just breaking down the formatting of these anchor standards with the description of the key standard and then the performance indicators below. As an example, depending on the industry sector area, these anchor standards may look different. These are two different sectors, arts, media, and entertainment, and building and construction trades, both with the anchor standard health and safety. But what you'll notice is that the building and construction trades has more performance indicators for health and safety than arts, media, and entertainment. And this is most likely because there is a higher need for safety elements in a construction program, right, on the job site and so on, that they would need to have, as opposed to a arts, media, and entertainment space. So again, depending on your industry sector, your knowledge and performance anchor standards may look a little different. What you may have also noticed while you were looking at your anchor standards was that they were aligned with those standards for career-ready practice. 2.0 in the anchor standards, communications, is the same as number 2 on the standards for career-ready practice, communication. And so what they did was try to align the standards for career-ready practice to each industry sector in a way that was relevant to that particular sector. So taking, again, those broad standards that all students should know in order to be successful in post-secondary and the workplace, and then enhancing them to be more specific, just like that pyramid shows us. It's a little bit narrower for that particular industry sector. So how can teachers integrate the knowledge and performance anchor standards into their courses? And again, you do this all the time already. You utilize multiple of these standards in your programs along the way and in every situation, like the critical thinking, like the communication, like the technology as of most recent. So things like that. How, just think to yourself how you can continue to integrate these into your programs. And maybe there are some standards that more recently have become more utilized or more pressing, such as the technology anchor standard. Okay, we're going to continue on moving up the pyramid. We're going to talk about pathway standards at this point in time. So again, there are 15 industry sectors as designated by the California Department of Education, and each sector has multiple pathways within it where there are specific standards related to that pathway. What we would like for you to do is in your industry sector document, standards document, find the pathway that is relative to the courses you teach. Now, you might, again, have courses across multiple pathways, but we'd like for you to try to find the pathway that you feel is primary to your content, and probably the pathway where your courses are coded and sequenced, right, for students to become pathway completers upon completing those 2 courses in the same pathway. So if you're familiar with your course sequence and you're familiar with the pathway where those belong, let's look at that pathway within your CTE standards document. Now, these pathway standards are unique. They designed these different pathway areas to be organized by certain careers within that industry sector that had high skill and high wage work environments and labor market demand. So they're organized by similar functions and services. The standards and performance indicators were really enhanced with that redesign in 2013 so that they could be actionable and measurable. Instead of knowing and understanding, they're more like creating or developing, things like that. And then also what we wanted to point out is that the sequence of these pathway standards builds from simple to complex knowledge and performance. So depending, again, on your industry sector and your pathway, they might look a little bit different. Once again, the standards, similar to the same format as those anchor standards that we looked at earlier. The main standard is bolded at the top with the performance indicators below. So this example is taken from the International Business Pathway, which is part of the business and finance industry sector. And so it is designated by the letter C. So each pathway has a letter that it is designated by in that sector. So international business is the 3rd pathway in the business and finance sector. And you'll notice here that C 1.0 is describe the fundamental concepts of international business. All right, so underneath that standard, there are multiple performance indicators in which to measure whether or not students can describe the fundamental concepts of international business. You'll notice that the first performance indicator, C1.1, says identify forms of business ownership, whereas as the performance indicators increase in number, they increase in rigor. C1.3, that now they're illustrating the process of buying, selling, and promoting products. And C1.5, they're actually constructing and defending a business plan. So where you might have introductory, concentrator, and more advanced courses, you'll pick and choose the standards that you feel are appropriate for that level of course content for that course in your pathway. So you might have the more introductory level standards for a more introductory level course, and then utilize those high rigor standards and performance indicators on your more rigorous capstone courses. So as an example of some of these standards and how they could be utilized and how they build really from simple to complex, we wanted to provide to you this example given to us. This is from the CTE, utilizing this beyond knowledge construct. And this is a 4-quadrant matrix that shows us each of the quadrants in where samples of key assignments utilize simple to complex standards and of knowledge and performance. So this first quadrant, quadrant A, the example is list 15 building products and find a green alternative to each one. So this is a building and construction trades, sector, idea here. So all the students here that are doing, they're finding products and they're creating a list. It's very basic in facts and recalling information and using one-step process. If we move to quadrant B, there's a higher level of performance, but it's still a lower level knowledge activity. So here students are constructing, so they're creating something, a 1/8 scale model of a garage using only recycled materials. They're still having to identify those recycled materials, but they're actually building a 1/8 scale model of a garage using those materials. If we move to quadrant C, here we have a lower level of performance, but a higher level of knowledge. Here they're explaining the advantages and disadvantages of using recycled building materials. So they could be, writing a short essay or doing a presentation where they're explaining through the information they've gathered the advantages and disadvantages, but they're doing a simple process. Quadrant D is what we all aim for, where we really are tying high levels of knowledge and high levels of performance into the activities that we have students perform. Quadrant D, the example that's given here is that students would develop a wind-resistant solar carport for student parking lots and convince the school board to fund it. So not only are they creating something and problem solving, but they're also utilizing a high level of knowledge to develop an argument that they would need to use to convince the school board to provide funding for this project. So, so again, different steps, different activities, utilizing a variety of standards and performance indicators, and how those build. And again, depending on the course that you're focused on in your sequence, and how students are continuing to build on their content knowledge, that's the way in which that these standards were developed, so that you could utilize them to help students grow in their knowledge and their skills as they go through your programs. Okay, let's talk about academic integration for just a moment. So the academic alignment matrix was completely new in the 2013 version of the CTE Model Curriculum Standards. Again, it was developed to show how CTE enhances and reinforces academic knowledge. You'll find your academic alignment matrix at the end of your CTE industry sector document. This is what it looks like here. And this example is pulled from the agriculture and natural resources industry sector. So across the top, you'll notice the pathways that are included in the ag and natural resources sector by their letter there. And then along the side, it starts here with English language arts. There's several different academic areas, including English, math, science, and sometimes social sciences as well, in this academic alignment matrix for your industry sector. So in utilizing this matrix, you could find which pathway you're teaching in and identify pretty quickly where it could align to certain academic subjects and where you could integrate your course content. So of course, reinforcing those academic the information that they're learning in their academic programs and how what they're learning can be utilized and applied through your CTE pathway course brings relevance, right, to students, and it helps them understand why they're learning what they're learning and how it can be useful for them in the future in their career. So we wanted to just, again, take a moment to highlight the academic alignment matrix. We wish we had more time to spend on that, but we encourage you to check that out and see how you might be able to identify the academic standards that you're touching on in your pathway programs. At the top of the pyramid, we have industry and employer specific standards. Now, these are not included in your industry sector CTE Model Curriculum Standards document because they're specific, right, to particular industry and employers that belong in your local region and community. As CTE instructors, you all have business partners that you connect with for work-based learning experiences, as well as advisory committee functions and things like that. And so we just wanted to highlight that, again, moving up the pyramid, these become more and more specific and more narrow to the groups in which you're working with and where students will end up in their career. A couple of examples, though, of these industry skills. This is an example from the National Network of Business and Industry Associations. And what they identified were common employability skills. So you'll look at these and see that many of them align with the knowledge and performance anchor standards and those standards for career-ready practice that we looked at a little bit ago. But these were all developed and identified by workplace professionals, by employers, by industry partners, not necessarily directly connected to our educational system. These were things that they felt were important for young people to be successful in the workplace, like communication, like problem solving, and some of the things we've already talked about, utilizing technologies on here as well. So, and then of course that integration of academics, reading, writing, math, so on and so forth. So it's important to continue to make the connections with your industry partners in what what they see are needs for your students. And again, kind of very broad, but important, right? That students have the ability to integrate well and work well in the workplace outside of the technical skills that they're learning in your CTE programs. This is a second example that we have from the Department of Education. So again, this is our national level education system. And you'll notice that this, again, looks very similar. Interpersonal skills, critical thinking, communication. These were the employability skills that they identified are critical for students to have to be successful in post-secondary and the workforce. And if you follow this link here, it's actually an interactive diagram that you can hover over certain parts and it moves and expands and provides descriptions. And I thought it was a great example of, once again, those employability skills. So important just to note a couple of those. Now, how do students acquire these skills? Well, they do it mostly and mainly a lot of times through their work-based learning experiences. And we're fortunate to have some really wonderful partners that host students in internship experiences, but that's not the only type of work-based learning. Even having partners come in and talk to your students, or hosting a virtual Zoom meeting with a business partner, since they can't physically be present right now. So there's a variety of different levels of engagement when it comes to business partners and work-based learning for students. And we encourage you to continue to do that, because as you know, when they hear it directly from the mouth of a industry professional, they're likely to perk up and really pay attention because they know that that's what they're going to need in order to be employed and have a great job someday. Okay, so course content and standards integration. All right, we've gone over a lot. We looked at that entire pyramid, top to bottom, and so now you're probably feeling like, okay, this is a lot of great information, but really, how do I use these? And again, depending on your level of knowledge, your knowledge and experience with the standards and how you have utilized them up to this point, you might already feel very comfortable, but you might also feel like, I know they're there and there's some good stuff, but I'm just not plugging them in regularly, or I really want to know how I might be able to look at my course content and figure out how it aligns with the standards. So we're going to give you a couple quick tips and ideas on how you might be able to plug these standards in to your existing curriculum or programs that you are developing or looking at expanding. One of the best pieces of advice we could give you is to really look at your program of study. So if you have multiple courses in your sequence, we think the best thing to do is really backwards map. So at the end of the pathway, let's say that senior year, that capstone level course, what do we want students to be able to walk away with? What competencies are they going to have under their belt, whether that be experience, skills, certifications, obviously the content knowledge, things like that, and then backwards map. So if this is the absolute top end that they're going to have, what does that look like? What do we need to do in order to prepare students for that capstone level course? And then if we have a concentrator, what do we need to do before that via an introductory course, perhaps, to prepare them for the concentrator that's going to be more in depth into that pathway. So no matter how many courses you have in your sequence, even if you just have a single course in your pathway, still think about the end. Begin with the end in mind, and then backwards map from there, and figure out how each unit in your course builds on each other and how each course in the sequence builds on each other. So each course that you have has a set of course competencies. Once again, what students are going to be able to know and do when they are done with that course upon successful completion. And so when you're designing your instruction in your courses, look at those units of study. What are the big buckets of content that they're going to learn and be able to do? And then in each of those units, what are the key assignments that they're working on? It could be projects. It could be other types of activities that they're doing that build and that are all part of a single unit. And then all of those units together creating those competencies for them to be prepared. Again, unpacking those CTE standards one by one, we have those anchor standards, right, for your sector, which are those broad elements that, again, you probably have multiple anchor standards in every lesson, every day that you're teaching. And then there are the more specific pathway standards. You're not going to cover every standard in your pathway in a single course. And they're not really designed to do that. So we don't want you to look at those pathway standards and look at them like they are your course outline, start to finish, 1 through 6 or however many there are. And we certainly don't expect every one of those performance indicators to be integrated into every course as well, because remember, they build in rigor. And so, you have to think about your program and how those pathway standards align to what you're teaching in your course, because it may look different than what someone else is doing. And so there's no right or wrong necessarily. It's really what's relevant to your program. And again, the number of courses you have in your sequence and so on. Again, the units of study and the key assignments and things like that. The academic alignment matrix is that academic integration piece again. So utilizing those, finding where you have alignment in your pathway courses with English, with math, so on and so forth. Okay. So we encourage you to look at your course outline and again, ask yourself, what knowledge and skills will students walk away with? Is there alignment with all the courses in your pathway sequence? And this is a big question really, because again, if you have multiple courses in your pathway, are they really building on each other? Is what they're learning in that concentrator course preparing them for that capstone course? And are the standards really aligned in that way as well? You know, if they're going back to that international business pathway example that we had, are they doing you know, those performance indicators being utilized, you know, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, for example, and then 1.5, 1.7, whatever, utilized in the capstone course? Like, does that make sense? Is there alignment across the courses? And also let's talk about, you know, if you are in a district where there are multiple high school campuses and there's the same course being taught at the different high schools, but it's the same course, how are you aligning with other instructors at those other campuses to align your content and your curriculum for that course? If it's called International Business at High School A, and there's an International Business at High School B, highly encourage you to meet with those pathway teams, with your other fellow teachers, to align your content and your standards in those programs. It really makes a difference. How can you use the standards to develop and evaluate course competencies? Well, those performance indicators, right? Those are great examples on how you can evaluate your course competencies. So if it says to construct a business plan, that's the performance indicator right there. I mean, it doesn't tell you how that's going to happen. You develop that as the instructor, but that is the measurable that they're going to develop and or defend their business plan that they've created. And so, you know, that could be one of your course competencies, is that they're going to walk away with the knowledge of how to develop a business plan and, you know, ask for funding for their new business. And then also just think about, you know, what other competencies could be added when you're looking at your course outline overall. And again, with the transition we've had most recently to distance learning, you know, are there things that you might not have considered prior that now make more sense to plug in? And or were there standards before that aren't necessarily, you know, actually being used in your program? So what updates or changes could you make based on, you know, what you're planning? So I mentioned a couple of these things already, but just a couple of reminders. You know, again, the standards for your pathway are not your course outline. Courses do not need to cover every standard. As a matter of fact, they're not intended for that at all. But your lessons and your units and your assignments should map back to the standards. If you're teaching something in your program and it does not relate at all to a standard, I want you to find out why, and how is that? How does that align to that industry outside of what has been developed? And again, you may have multiple pathways that you teach from, and so you might pull something from a you know, I'm going to use business and finance again because I was personally a business teacher. So, you know, there might be something in that international business pathway that you're pulling out of the entrepreneurship pathway. And so, and that's okay. That's okay. As long as you know that, you know, you have a primary pathway that's selected, you know, and really looking at your course outline and your key assignments and your units, identifying, you know, does the pathway where my course is aligned, does that really make sense? Is it really an international business pathway, or is it really an entrepreneurship pathway? Where are the most of the standards that I'm using in my program? Where does that fit, you know? And so looking at those, and then again, looking at the multiple courses in your pathway and thinking about how they flow, you know, do they build on each other? Okay. So again, for existing courses, identify which standards are taught in each unit, which you may or may not have already done, but this is a great chance to look at some of those and dive deeper. Identify to what level the standards are being taught. So maybe as you're going through your course outline and you're looking at the standards and how they're aligned, you think, you know, this standard I do a lot. This standard, we hit on it once and we're done. And that might be completely appropriate for your course. But just considering those things and how they relate to the overall student learning outcomes and the course competencies, and making sure that they fit. And then integrating additional standards and content where appropriate, as I mentioned, even pulling from other pathways where there might be relevance, or you know, things that are important to highlight and communicate to students in a particular unit or lesson. If you are developing a new course, which may or may not be on the docket, and that's okay, but if you are, again, keep that backwards map in mind. So if you are developing, you know, the next step in your course sequence, look at, again, what is it that students are going to have when they complete this pathway, and what do I need to do to prepare them along each step of the way, each course that they're taking, so that everything flows and makes sense, and that they're ready to be successful in their next step. So again, what we would encourage you to do is look at your course outlines and map each instructional unit back to one or more of the pathway standards. There's probably going to be more than one, I'll tell you that right now. But again, it just depends on your course and your curriculum. And you can take that unit and or the activities or assignments that are included in that unit and align them to the standards and performance indicators that you feel are appropriate for that. There are a couple examples here of course outlines where the standards have been aligned to particular units and key assignments and activities within that unit. Here they're actually aligned to the student outcomes, so what students are able to do by the end of that unit. On this other example here, it's developed by key assignment. So depending on your district course outline template, or you know where your course outline is coming from, it might look a little bit different. But essentially what you're trying to do is find where those standards are aligned to your student learning outcomes and your course content. So in this example here, you'll notice that they have different columns for the different sets of standards. The career ready practices and the anchor standards are included here, as well as the pathway standards and the common core state standards as well. So every key assignment in this particular outline had the standards integrated throughout. So this is a really great example, because if a new teacher comes on board or you're working with other teachers in your pathway, you would be able to have a quick reference sheet on what standards are being integrated throughout the course content and how those prepare students along the way to meet those student learning outcomes or those course competencies at the end. So a couple next steps as you continue to work through your planning and looking back at your course outlines. You know, think about what revisions you might make to your course. We know again that because of our distance learning environment that we're currently working in and maybe in to some degree in the fall, that there might need to be some adjustments made to the way that our curriculum is set up and how some of these standards might be implemented. And so thinking ahead, how do we continue to meet the standards for our CTE pathway in a way that is still relevant and engaging for students, and in a way that still allows them to gain the knowledge and skills that they need to be successful and complete the student learning outcomes that they need. And then of course, are there any additional standards that you haven't looked at before? Really dive into those standards for career ready practice and the anchor standards and the academic alignment matrix as well, and identify what standards you might not have considered before and where those could be plugged in. So a couple resources just as we wrap up. And again, you will be receiving this PowerPoint via email. once the webinar is completed. So, but a couple quick things. On the CTE Online website, if you haven't been to CTE Online, I highly encourage you to do so. They actually have standards aligned lessons and units for distance learning right now that are accessible. It's totally free. You create an account. It's developed through the California Department of Education, but the CTE resources and curriculum that's on CTE Online is all standards aligned to all of the standards. So you can search by course outlines, you can search by projects, you can also look for specific lessons, and there are a lot of great resources like videos, downloadable assignments and templates, things like that that you can utilize that already have the standards integrated into them. So it's a fantastic place to go and look for additional resources. There's also a couple other websites I have here. I have the CTE Standards link as well that that I had in the chat box from earlier that you can go to get all your CTE standards. The last one that I have here that I want to show you real quick, and again, these links will work on the PowerPoint that I send to you via email afterwards, because the URL was just too lengthy to put on this slide, but I'm going to show you really quickly. This last link, the one here in blue, it says CTE Model Curriculum Standards PD Modules. This is actually a website. It's through my digital chalkboard, but it's a great resource for, there's several industry sectors where there have been videos developed by CTE teachers and how they're integrating the CTE standards into their particular curriculum. And there's like a series. There's a series for transportation. There's a series for health careers. It's pretty great. So let me see if I can just pop over to this other. I think I need to switch my share. Go to screen, okay. Oh, not that one. It's this one. Okay. So give it just a moment to load. So when you go to my digital chalkboard, it'll take you to this page, that final link on the slide, as I mentioned. They're called the CTE Professional Development Modules, and it's a list of the CTE standards videos. It's actually a Google Doc with a whole list of standards videos for the sector, for several sectors, not every one of the 15 industry sectors, but several on here that are really helpful in identifying how you can integrate them. And it gives examples from other teachers that have had to go through this work. They're really, really awesome. I highly recommend them. So check that out. Okay, I'll go back to my PowerPoint slideshow. And at this point in time, we're going to just open it up to any final questions or comments that you may have. We're coming up on our noon end time. So I just wanted to. Does anyone have any questions? No? No questions? Okay. Well, with that, I hope this was a helpful refresher on the CTE standards. I know it's a lot of information, but again, I will send a follow-up email with the link to the PowerPoint. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded, and we will get this up on YouTube and send you that link as well. So if you know someone that wasn't able to attend today, you can send them the link to watch the video. So again, we will just say thank you again for taking the time out of your day to attend the webinar. Thank you all so much for being here and for all the hard work that you've done these last few months. Enjoy your summer, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in the fall. Okay? Have a wonderful day. Thank you.